My mini mic. Well, I don't know. We'll see. But look, it's tiny.
We'll call to order the regular meeting of the Solvang City Council for Monday, May 9th, 2016. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Deuce,
Here.
Jameson,
Here.
Skit,
Here.
Zimmerman,
Here.
Mayor Richardson.
Here. Mr. Zimmerman, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Place your hand over your heart. Repeat after me. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Presentations. We have presentations tonight?
We do not. That was left from last agenda, I believe.
Okay. On to City Manager's report.
Just one thing I'd like to report, thank our customers again. We had a good conservation in April. We were at 43% conservation from the 2013 year that we need to conserve from. And so I want to thank the citizens and hope they continue to do that in this fourth or fifth year of drought. So,
Thank you. That's actually, that's very commendable because of what we've gone through and had to do. And then because of the conservation efforts, we pulled the penalties off over usage of water, and it seems to have done the job of the people are being very conservative in the use of water.
I told you we could trust our residents.
I'm sorry?
I told you we could trust our residents.
Yes, I believe that now.
We'll see how it goes.
Public communications, written or verbal. This time, please direct comments to the City Council regarding consent calendar items or matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the council. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. I have no speaker slips. Does anyone wish to speak at this time? Seeing none, on to the council comments and requests. Would you like to start, Mr. Zimmerman?
I only have one announcement tonight. It's a personal one. My wife is pregnant and we're having another baby.
Oh, congratulations.
Still mostly. My only comment is congratulations to the Zimmerman family, and that's my entire comments tonight.
Mr. Deuce?
I'll ditto that one. But yeah, I have some comments. So I went to the North County Economic Summit up in Santa Maria at Radisson Friday, and it was it was a good meeting. I came back with one thing that just really stuck, and that was the last speaker. He was a columnist from the Sacramento area. And he said, look back 100 years of one of the greatest cities in the United States. Just really up and coming, had everything going for it. It's Detroit, or it was Detroit. Look at it 100 years later. And his point was, California had better be careful. So that just really stuck with me. That was, you know, there were a lot of good things said, but that was the one. This was a busy weekend, the marathon, and the start of the 86th trek of the Rancho Visitadores. And I think no way I was going to try to count horses, but I think this was one of the bigger groups I've seen in my years here. So hope the weather holds and it doesn't get too hot. My comments.
Mrs. Jameson?
Yes, it's quite an impressive sight to see 700 plus horses ride up LSL and about 24 wagons. I had one concern about this weekend. I don't know who does the scheduling for the Valley, but I had a lot of complaints of people that usually can get hotel and motel rooms in town, and they couldn't this weekend because of the marathon. So I would hope that this doesn't happen again, so that there are two major events. I think the city of Solvang lost out in that many of the people went to Santa Barbara and spent the weekend because they couldn't get in here. So
Yeah, I think that happens about every 4 years where they fall on the same weekend. Otherwise, they're alternating because the half marathon is Mother's Day weekend. And the Vistadores, it depends on where.
it's always the
that-
first Saturday.
Yeah, where that comes into
Yeah.
play, so.
And I just want to thank the Vistadores for their over $500,000 donations in the last 5 years to the Cancer Center of Santa Barbara. That's helped over 2,000 breast cancer survivors, both men and women. So that's kind of cool. And I think they'll probably do it maybe 1 or 2 more years. I really appreciate the fact that this year the shirts weren't solid pink. There's a little variety to it. I don't know how I can stand more pink shirts in my husband's closet. But it was a nice weekend, and the ladies that come from far and near really enjoy coming to the Valley. They love it here, and they know that all of us that live here are very, very fortunate. And I told them they had to take short showers in the hotels.
Thank you. I have to agree about the Visitadores. It was a great, it's a great event every year, and I like to tell folks that it's probably one of the best weekends that we have in the year time, and that they'll never see another example of horsemen and horsemanship except probably in an old John Wayne movie, because it's just that wonderful. On to the approval of the agenda as presented. I have one speaker slip for the transit speaker, and I'd hate to make him wait through the water presentations. Can we readjust the agenda?
We can do whatever the council would desire.
Shall we do that? Okay, then let's change the agenda to number 8 instead of 6, and then we'll go 8, 6, 7 in that order. Is that all right with you? Okay, good. All right. With that, then I need approval for the council minutes of April 25th, 2016. Are there additions, corrections, or deletions? Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? That passed with a 5-0. The consent agenda. Does anybody want to pull any items off the consent agenda, which there's only one? Seeing none, can I have a motion approving?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Pass. On to item number 8.
Item 8, award San Ynez Valley Transit Operations Contract.
Staff report.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Richardson, council members, Matt Vanderlinden, your Public Works Director and City Engineer. And tonight, we have the staff report for award of the contract, the operations contract for the San Ynez Valley Transit. I'd like to introduce, though, Jim Moore with Moore & Associates. He's our consultant. Moore & Associates provides the city with management assistance and administrative assistance for the San Ynez Valley Transit program, as well as marketing for the bus service. And anyway, with that, I will turn it over to him, and he will make the presentation, but we'll both be available to answer questions at the end.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. As Mr. Vanderlinden indicated, my name is Jim Moore. I had the good fortune of working with the city and its transit partners for about the last 15 years. And the purpose of our visit this evening is to ask for your agreement or acceptance of the staff's recommendation regarding the operating contract for the San Ynez Valley Transit. Solvang, as you may know, is the managing partner of SYVT and has had a 5-year contract with Store Transportation for the operations and maintenance of that program. Store, across the last 5 years, has also operated the City of Lompoc's public transit service. And it was through a shared procurement 5 years ago that we selected Store along with the City of Lompoc. Our program here in the San Ynez Valley is considerably smaller, and we felt that we would realize certain cost savings or economies of scale by partnering with a larger, with a larger property. Store advised the City of Lompoc that it was not interested in extending its operating contract with the City of Lompoc past June of this year. So with that information, the City of Solvang met with its transit partners, City of Buellton and the County of Santa Barbara, and they decided to issue a request for proposals. The RFP document was approved by Caltrans in January 2016. It was released in February of 2016, and it was on the street for about 4 weeks. And at the time, just immediately prior to its release, it was promoted through both the local paper as well as through transit industry publications and other outlets. In total, we received 5 proposals. All were determined to be responsive and qualified. They included both a technical proposal and a sealed cost proposal. The technical proposals were evaluated by the city manager, the city public works director, city engineer, and 1 representative from my firm, not myself. Each bidder was then provided with a series of questions, a set of questions that included both shared questions across all bidders, as well as a series of questions that were specific to their individual proposal. All 5 bidders were subsequently invited in for an interview. 4 participated in the interview process. 1 ultimately withdrew prior to the interview. The interview panel consisted of the city engineer, public works director, a representative from the County of Santa Barbara's Public Works Department, who also sits as the staff representative on the Transit Partnership Committee, and another representative from my firm, not myself. At the end of the interviews, the bidder rankings were unanimous in terms of the interviews. The interview panel then reviewed the cost proposals, and as a result of that, they determined that 2 firms, Transportation Concepts and Roadrunner, were the 2 top-ranked candidates. And each bidder, at the conclusion of the interview, was advised that the city, as the managing entity, intended then to conduct a best and final, or BAFO, process. The city then, following the identification of the 2 top-ranked candidates, initiated the BAFO process. Both Transportation Concepts and Roadrunner submitted their BAFO response in advance of the stipulated deadline. And following review of the BAFO submittals, Roadrunner was determined as the bidder who was proposing the greatest value for SYVT. The proposal rankings, the interview ratings, the cost proposal ratings, and the BAFO responses were then presented to Caltrans, which reviewed and then provided its final approval. Assuming the council takes the action of confirming the city staff's recommendation, we're looking at a July 1st startup, and during that time, I will be available to assist with a smooth transition. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, if should you or members of the council have any questions, I will do my best to respond.
A few clarifications. So I wanted to add a few clarifications. First of all, when we were beginning to prepare the RFP, we did contact the City of Lompoc, and specifically were interested in doing a joint request for a proposal like was done 5 years ago. Their public works staff initially wanted to go that route, but their city attorney told them that he didn't want them to do that. So, so we did try to seek out the same exact procedure as we did 5 years ago, but the City of Lompoc refused to. They told us they wouldn't do that with us this time. And then I also wanted to let you know, when we received all the proposals, well, actually, even before we received the proposals, the RFP was routed, the draft RFP was routed to the City of Buellton, and the County of Santa Barbara for their review and comments. And when we received the proposals, we invited the City of Buellton and the County of Santa Barbara to be on the review panel if they wished, and they both declined because it's kind of a time-consuming, effort. But subsequently, Matt Daubertine with the county, we asked him to be on the interview panel, and that was just a one-day commitment, and he agreed to that. So Matt Daubertine with the County Public Works, who oversees all the transit operations for the county, was the panel member from the county. And I will mention that we did receive a phone call from Store Transit concerned about our process. And I did want to let you know, I'm sure Stephen will express their concerns, but we feel we followed the process as accurately and carefully as we could. We very carefully obtained Caltrans approvals all through the step, at every step of the process, just to make sure we weren't doing anything wrong. And we proceeded in what I feel is a totally ethical and moral manner, and trying to get the very best service for the city. And our recommendation this evening is based on, our desire to recommend the very best that we can for the city, and we stand behind that. Was one other thing I was going to mention, but anyway. So like Jim Moore mentioned, we're available for any questions you have.
Are there any questions of the staff presentation? Yeah.
You mentioned that Store sent a letter. Was Store one of the companies that replied to our RFP in the first place?
Yes, Store Transit Systems did. They were one of the 5 firms that responded to the request for proposal. And of course, as Jim mentioned, they were all invited for an interview. And so Store was one of those. The four of the 5 did
So
accept.
they have the same fair chance as anybody else, and
Correct.
They knew what the requirements were, and okay.
Correct, that is correct.
Are there any other questions? Are we going to make a selection of the option A or B?
Staff's recommending option B.
Now, I have a question about that. Option B requires a part-time overseer or manager.
Correct.
Would it be possible that we combine option A and option B to this extent that in the first year or thereabouts, that they have a full-time manager to ensure smooth transition, and then in the future drop to option B? Would that be an okay thing? And then if we have to, bring it back to option A in case things aren't going as smoothly as we'd hoped?
Yeah, well, that's certainly a possibility. That's not what staff would recommend. In our current 5-year contract that's going to expire June 30th here, with the City of Lompoc, we have a shared project manager. And with that arrangement, the City of Solvang only has a 20% or 1 day a week presence of the project manager here in Solvang. So we've got a 20-80 sharing arrangement right now, which allows our operations contract to be as low as possible, and therefore, meet our fare box recovery ratio. So the costs are very important in a contract like this, because we have to meet our fare box recovery ratio, otherwise our federal and state funding can get reduced. So we felt that increasing to a 50% initially is going to be like more than double the time that we currently have. So we felt that was more than sufficient to allow for a smooth transition.
In the event that something does occur, though, that we get unsatisfactory reports and as unsatisfactory services, we could swing back into that option B, or at least insist on full-time coverage because of the poor performance. No?
Yeah, we certainly could do a contract amendment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jim?
Mayor, thank you for your question. Certainly a smooth transition, and then also maintain the quality of service that the community has come to enjoy is top priority for us. Subsequent to your action tonight, if in fact you affirm the city staff's recommendation, which would then lead to a change and also a transition in contractors, I, along with Mr. Van der Linden, will be meeting with both the incumbent contractor, Store Transportation, as well as the proposed contractor, Roadrunner, to go over a transition plan to ensure, in fact, that there is adequate and appropriate monitoring, and also management available throughout the initial startup period. After a period of about 90 days, I would make a recommendation to the city staff about what would be appropriate moving forward.
Okay. Any other questions? Excuse me.
And STORE is willing to work with us during this transition?
Well, we can't force them to do anything, but we're hoping that they'll honor their contract and the terms of the existing contract till it ends, which would require that they cooperate with us in that manner, so.
You've got more.
The city has a contract with STORE that would remain in place through June 30th. And STORE is also a firm that is, an extremely reputable, extremely qualified firm that does business throughout the state of California. I have no reason to expect that STORE would not continue to offer the high quality of service and professional outlook that they have provided the city and its partners across the last 5 years.
Actually, I'm sorry to see STORE go because they've done such a good job.
They have done a very good job.
Wonderful job. So. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any speaker, don't have, Stephen Fernandez, I have a speaker slip.
Good evening, Mayor Richardson and council members. My name is Stephen Fernandez, the Vice President for STORE Transit Systems, located in Modesto, California, 3519 McDonald Avenue. We've been your contractor for transit services for the last 5 years. We've enjoyed our time of service here, and we think we've done a remarkable job in providing the service to the city of Solvang and your partners for the SYVT operation. In those 5 years, we have not received a single complaint from the city in regards to the transit operations that we've provided, neither here nor in Lompoc. So that sounds like we've done an outstanding job. And Mayor Richardson, in regards to your question about if you have problems with your new contractor, then maybe the city didn't make the best recommendation, because in the last 5 years you have had none with STORE Transportation Service. We've provided a safe, clean, and reliable service to all of your citizens in the last 5 years. And please note that the concerns that I'm going to bring up, as Matt has indicated, were addressed with Matt and with Moore and Associates on Friday. So we have had that conversation with them in regards to these concerns. On March 16, 2016, STORE Transportation submitted a sealed bid to the city in regards to their RFP for the continued operation of SYVT. We provided rates, 5 years rates that were required. On April 27th, we received a letter from the city indicating that they had received 5 qualified bids and that they were going to recommend a service go to Roadrunner. Roadrunner's in the audience this evening. They're fine gentlemen, I'm sure. I don't know them personally, so I'm not speaking against Roadrunner. It's about the process that occurred. On May 5th, we reviewed all of the online documentation that you've been provided in regards to this process. So the exact documentations that you have in your possession is exactly what we reviewed. And we were concerned because it doesn't appear that it's very transparent. It appears that there are some issues in regards to those documents and that things aren't very clear. At least we couldn't determine through the documents that were provided. We were shocked when we saw Roadrunner's costing proposal, as there was no costing information provided to you in that information in regards to their original proposal. Nobody knows what their original costing information was. We know what ours was, but what was theirs? All you can see in your information was their original, or their BAFO, their best and final offer. Who knows? We may have been the low bidder, but nobody knows. There's no transparency in that process. You can't see it, neither can we. The city requested BAFO of 2 contractors. We thought it was 1. And based on the BAFO information, we note that we were 84 cents higher than the recommended contractor. So the recommended contractor's second bite at the apple, or their BAFO, is 84 cents lower than we were. But we don't know what their original cost was. And again, remember, we've provided an outstanding service for you, so even 84 cents at a BAFO, it's a really close in regards to the cost. Furthermore, the contractor was asked to provide another bid and other options, but we weren't. We weren't allowed to provide a BAFO. We weren't allowed to provide other options, options that in fact go against the RFP, as the RFP was placed out, requiring a full-time manager, requiring a specific amount of insurance, being $5 million. Those things are not included in your current information. If you look at your information, you'll see that the Roadrunner is providing you with $3 million of auto liability and $1 million of an umbrella policy. That's $4 million. Doesn't even meet the requirements of your RFP. Our company provided you with $10 million, twice what you required in your RFP. Is that worth 84 cents? I don't know, possibly. This contractor was also allowed to provide bid options for an additional 5 years, so for a 10-year lookout. None of the other people were allowed to do that as either part of BAFO or the original process. Roadrunner provided you with a part-time manager. The manager, based on the information in your packet, doesn't have any transit management experience, has been a transit fleet manager, which means maintenance of vehicles, but doesn't have any transit manager experience, and in fact hasn't, according to the information in your packet, hasn't worked for Roadrunner since 2008. The manager that we proposed has been the manager of this system for 10 years. 5 years with the prior contractor, 5 years with us, and knows most of your customers by the sound of their voice when they call on the phone. Again, a deviation in what's required on your RFP and what's been accepted by the city as Roadrunner's proposal is confusing to us. How is that being allowed to happen? How is less insurance being allowed? How is a part-time manager being allowed? How are these things being allowed to take place? We're confused, especially when we are the current contractor that has provided you with such an outstanding service. It appears, and it just appears, I'm not saying that there is or there isn't, but it appears that there's some type of backroom negotiations going on. Something's happening behind the scenes that you're not aware of and that we're not aware of. It just doesn't feel right if this is being allowed to happen. Roadrunner was allowed to give bids that don't conform to the RFP, a distinct disadvantage to other bidders, including us. The transparency in your board packets is confusing because all the information isn't there. You have no idea what the other contractors bid based on the information in your packet. Neither do we, and neither does the public. It's not there. Ours isn't there. We believe the integrity of this process has been compromised somewhere along the way, and we ask that you reject this proposal by the city at this time and take a look into what's taken place, investigate, inquire what's happened, and then let the process move forward, because it just doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem right, and it doesn't smell right. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for your information. Don't go away. Is there anybody else in the public that wishes to speak at this time? I have no other speaker slips. Coming back, then we'll take it back to the council for comment and action. Does anybody have any comments to make regarding this public speaker?
I like, based on everything that was just said, which is good information and obviously did your homework, how do we respond to that, staff?
Sure. First of all, there's several comments that were made that were not accurate, quite not accurate. So we've had a number of complaints with STORE over the last 5 years. However, we've tried not to escalate those to the city council. We have met frequently with them. We have a quarter, or I think it's every 2-month meeting with Moore & Associates and their operations manager, or their project manager. And I'm not always involved in those meetings, but I have communication with Moore & Associates, and they frequently meet with them alone. But we have an agenda for those meetings, and we frequently talk about, most of the problems haven't been huge, but anything like that, but it hasn't run perfectly, and we've, expressed a number of complaints to them. The other thing is, they mentioned about their current project manager. One of the factors when the staff originally recommended STORE transit systems 5 years ago was their outstanding project manager that they were proposing for our service. And about a year and a half ago, that project manager was let go. The city was never informed by STORE, ever. We had to find out kind of via the grapevine through Moore and Associates, and about 6 to 8 months went by before we even really knew what was going on. The person that's our operations manager right now, or the project manager, was the dispatch person. And that's the person they brought in the interview as their project manager. So in a sense, we were supposed to have a project manager part-time and a dispatcher part-time, and then we ended up just with the dispatcher that was doing both. And she seemed like a really nice lady and everything, but definitely their interview was very weak, and they got scored very low on that. And all the other firms had much superior project managers, not just Roadrunner. And so right now, for the last year and a half, we've had the dispatch person functioning as the project manager and dispatcher. So that's what we've been, and really, to be quite honestly with you, they're in violation of the contract. And then a couple other things. They talked about Roadrunner's original fee proposal. It's really irrelevant. That's why we go through this best and final offer process, and we identified the top 2 consultants and requested those proposals from them, the final best and final offers, and they provided that, which they came in lower than their previous cost proposal. Yeah. So their original amount is really irrelevant. I don't believe Stephen Fernandez is correct on their cost proposal being only 84 cents or whatever over Roadrunners. Maybe Jim can speak to that in a minute. Also, we did not request multiple options from the contractors. We basically asked them to provide a best and final offer, and anything that they thought, they could include to enhance the service and make it better, to basically help their proposal rise above the other one. And so this was the concept that Roadrunner came up with. I think through the interview process or somewhere along the line, they understood that, cost was a critical factor to us. We didn't say that. We didn't ask for multiple options or anything like that. But they came up with that concept, trying to give us that option. And so that's how that came about. It wasn't anything the city requested or anything like that. Then also there was a comment about the insurance. Well, we just received Caltrans' final approval of the agreement just a few days ago, and that's been transmitted to Roadrunner for them to execute it and return it to us with their insurance. So they haven't actually provided us any insurance yet. And we're not asking you, Mayor Richardson, to sign the contract until we have all that, and the city attorney and the city clerk and city manager are all satisfied. So that's really not an issue. The RFP that we distributed stated exactly what the insurance requirements are. So I'm sure Roadrunner understands it and fully intends to comply with that. So I'm not really sure where that comment comes from. Also, subsequent to the submittal of the proposal, Roadrunner provided the city with a more detailed resume for their proposed project manager, Joe Flores. And he's been with Roadrunner for many years, and he's been doing transit management for the last several years, and he appears, for all intents and purposes, as far as we can tell, he appears to be a very strong project manager. Then the other, let me see here. Oh, and as far as the 10-year contract, so in the RFP, well, through the process of getting the RFP approved by Caltrans, we thought, hey, this is a really time-consuming, rigorous process. Be nice if we had the flexibility to award a 5-year contract and then be able to do an extension to that up to an additional 5 years. So we proposed that to Caltrans. They reviewed that. They approved that. That information was in the RFP. So all the proposers knew exactly. It was laid out. They all had the same, 5 years ago when we went through this process, we hadn't really thought of that. I mean, I was brand new, and Moore Associates, I think, did a great job. We were working with Lompoc as well. And so at that time, it was a 5-year contract with a possible of 2 1-year extensions. But this time around, we thought, hey, let's ask Caltrans if we can do this, a slightly modified approach. They said that's fine, and so we included that in the RFP. So, to say that it's not transparent and smells bad and whatever, I just really don't see that. I don't know if you want to add
Sorry,
anything
sir.
to that, Jim.
Yes, well, let me, would that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yes, Jim?
Mayor and members of council, following up on some of Mr. Van der Linden's comments, the cost proposal is the original cost information and nothing more than that. Therefore, to publish that information or for even to become part of the negotiation is unimportant. What really counts is the final negotiations through the best and final offer. And in fact, cost is but one of 5 criteria for the evaluation of the proposals. The insurance, the statement about the insurance is simply not correct. In fact, the city is already in receipt as part of the proposal from the top-ranked bidder, from Roadrunner, a certificate of insurance dated November of last year and current or valid through June of this year that talks about the $10 million coverage that they have. There's also been a statement this evening that the proposed project manager is not qualified or doesn't have experience. I have a copy of his resume, which I've also independently verified the entries here. He's been employed by Roadrunner for the last 6.5 years. And during that 6.5-year period of time, he's been involved with the City of Camarillo's Dial Ride project, as well as Ventura County Transportation Commission's bus program. And then before that, he had a very short, about a 7-month time away from Roadrunner. But before that time, all collected with Roadrunner, he has about 18 years experience. 6.5 years continuous most recently. Before that, a stint of another 7 years. And before that, held another position for about 5 years. So it's not as if his experience is insignificant. And they're in areas that are important to us. He's been a fleet manager, he's been an operations manager, and he's been a startup manager. Those are all relevant to us. To also, one thing that came to light subsequent or sort of concurrent with our process is the city of Lompoc has also gone through this procurement. And they've also recommended Roadrunner. So it is only because they've been able to be selected at Lompoc that they may be able to offer us some cost savings or economies of scale that perhaps somebody else wouldn't be able to offer. But we didn't know that when we were going through, the initial interview and evaluation period. So Mayor, members of council, if there's any other questions, I'll do my best to respond. But I feel very strongly that we have involved Caltrans through this. They're extremely meticulous in their review, and we have met the test. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the staff report?
Well, more of a comment. When we go out to bid on public works project or something like that, we see all the bids. And frankly, I'm surprised that we didn't really see anything like this in this.
It's not the same kind of process.
Oh, your microphone.
There you go. Well, I did have it on. It's not the same process.
Still not on.
My green light's on, but no one's home. It's not the same process. And so it's basically you're required to keep all those other things confidential. In the public works bid process, all those documents are confidential until the complete bid opening. But this isn't the same thing, and it's not a low bidder process. Mr. Moore mentioned that there was 5 different criteria, and price is just one of them because it's more like a professional services contract. You don't go through the low bidder. And also, this is it's not a Solvang contract. Yeah, you're the managing partner as between the county and Buellton and Solvang, but it's not the same process. We use Moore & Associates precisely because it's extremely difficult and time-consuming to deal with Caltrans and make sure you're following all of Caltrans rules and all the federal rules that work their way down through the Caltrans funding that comes in for these things. And so this best and final offer process is a very common process in these types of contracts, because that's what Caltrans is used to dealing with, and that's how you get to the best deal. And so in this process, the applicants, the proposers were whittled down to the top two before you started the best and final process. They didn't have to do two. They could have said, we have one and we'll just negotiate with one, and that would be perfectly legal. Somewhat gratuitously, I'm going to comment, because when we went through this process 5 years ago, I had to be way more heavily involved, but that was because the previous contractor to Storer was making accusations of nothing was above board and nothing transparent, and Storer's evil and Storer's bad, and we went through a whole big process, but we followed the processes correctly when Storer got the contract, and in my opinion, we followed the processes correctly this time. I didn't become involved just when their staff report went to you. Your staff and staff from Moore & Associates, although not Mr. Moore directly all the time, kept me informed at each step of the way to make sure that in addition to addressing Caltrans concerns, we were addressing the types of things that I want to see in contracts. And the process worked even better this time. But so I join in the recommendation that staff has made as to award of the contract at this time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I would just like to know what the 5 criteria are.
The five
Besides
criteria,
cost.
the 5 criteria include the overall ability of the contractor, the proposed methodology, its experience and references, its price, and also the project manager.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
I was impressed with the dial-a-ride portion of this, with dispatching and being able to approach that on the internet. It's another important thing, I think, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Is there any discussion about it? Then can I have a motion? Well, in that case, I'll make the motion.
I was gonna make it, you make it, I'll second.
I'm going to move staff recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Richardson?
Yes?
Councilmember Skip?
Yes.
Deuce?
Yes.
Jameson?
Yes.
Zimmerman?
Yes.
That's passed with a 5-0. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
thank you. And thank you for your input, please. And I wish you guys would have come up and introduced yourselves. Who's Mr. Flores?
Mayor, if I may have a moment, I'd like to introduce, now that you've taken, rather than just simply interested parties who wandered in, I thought I would take now the opportunity to introduce Mr. Sandlin, who's the representative from the corporation of Roadrunner. He and his family started Roadrunner. And then Mr. Flores, gentleman, who is the proposed project manager. And I'm sure they're very excited to be able to share some background and some ideas they have.
And they're making us look bad. They're all nice suits, and we're up here, well, we have one suit and tie.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank you, council members. We are honored to be your service provider for the next 5 to 10 years. Roadrunner started out just with one vehicle there in Ventura County, and we serviced all of Santa Barbara County and Ventura County for 25 years. And one of our biggest clients is right here next to you, the Chumash Casino. We provide most of their bus services for them today. We selected Joe Flores because he is the strongest project manager to lead this operation to success. We're going to be bringing all the services online to all the citizens that use the services. They can go online, they can check the status of their rides and check their updates, and we think it's going to be a great value to your citizens. I would like to introduce your project manager, Joe Flores.
Good evening, everyone. Joe Flores, project manager for Roadrunner Shuttle. It's an honor to actually come into Solvang because I came here as a kid with a family, and I started with Roadrunner back in 1996 as a vehicle washer, worked my way up to mechanics, fleet manager, customer service manager, operations manager, while continuing my education through college. And so we bring kind of like the next level of transportation to Solvang, which would include knowing where your ride is, client services, which include vehicle cleanliness, road calls. We provide on-time performance. Our NTD reporting is on real time, so you guys would be able to produce NTD reporting at any time. You know, I'm honored actually to represent the city of Solvang. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. With that, we go back.
His guild surely, isn't it?
Oh. We'll go back to, now we'll go to item 6.
Item 6, water projects update and capital improvement project direction.
Staff report. Can I interject something here? I read this inch and a half of information. I couldn't remember it all. I think it's highly technical, and it's broken into 2 geographical areas, i.e. the river and then the uplands. And I don't know how the rest of the council feels about the amount of data that we're supposed to understand and know and make decisions on. But for me, it's almost too much information to absorb and to make a decent decision on. And I think historically of the bad rap that the council got when State Water came in, accused them of not reading and understanding what they were working on. And this to me just as vital. So I'd like to ask the council if they'd like to see this bifurcated into 2 different groups, to have one discussion this evening and another discussion the next council meeting, or are you willing to go through the whole scenario tonight?
How are you going to divide it?
I'm sorry?
How are you going to divide it?
The upland in one section and the river in the other section. Because the presentations are different.
What about the reservoir? Where's that going to come in?
Reservoir can come with the upland. And to me, that's separated reasonably, you know.
What about Matt? Do you want to maybe give us a little oversight and
Well, I'm
think we
accused
can
of being
handle it.
long-winded, which I confess to. But I was planning to be very brief and try to summarize everything. I think.
Well, you know, I think that. Go right ahead.
Well, just what we do is we include all those attachments. Matt has given an analysis as your public works director on the recommendation. We're not really asking you to be the engineer on that project. In fact, we boiled it down to a single-page matrix at the first attachment to make it as simple, not simple, but just so you have kind of the whole picture that you're looking at. Is if you spend this kind of money, you're going to get this kind of production. So we did try to keep it as short as possible, but I think the concept, what Matt started this out with is really we need to know the direction that the council would like as we move into the next budget cycle, because you've got a lot of projects here and we really are looking for what we should be plugging into that next budget. So it's going to be a little difficult to do pieces at a time, but if the council does desire that, we could do that.
Mr. Hanley?
Yeah, is my mic working this time?
Yes.
Fantastic, okay, yeah. Kind of non-legal, but I also do have an institutional memory, because I got a whiter beard than the mayor. And I except for addressing your budget, there's no overriding need to be making decisions tonight. So if the council wanted to, especially after it hears the presentation, if it wanted to split discussion in any way, and then hear more presentation, I think that would be fine. I don't think you want to make decisions split, because one naturally affects the other. And if we use 20/20 hindsight from my chair, I think one of the problems has been in the last 18 years that I've been here is focusing too minutely on just one aspect of the water planning at a time, because you can't buy it all.
Correct.
And we'd be better served if you do need to be to a point where you feel that you've had enough time to comprehend everything that's before you, so you're comfortable with your policy decisions. But I don't think we should isolate the decision-making,
Well,
because it's too interrelated.
In going over this, there's a lot of technical information, i.e. Well depths and plugging and underground formations and slant drilling in the river and all those sorts of things. Is that we were given too much information, or?
Some of us enjoy that, Jim.
Well, it's not that I don't
Well, and I
enjoy
can
it.
give you an example of, I understand what you mean, because I have enough expertise even in water law to understand most of the things that are important to what I have to give you advice on. But I had to send emails to Matt while Brad was on vacation, so Matt could answer again a question that Brad has answered for me at least 3 or 4 times, but apparently doesn't sink into my brain, which is how to look at how many gallons per minute a well produce and turn that into acre feet per year. Because that's how we do the macro planning from that level that I'm more involved in watching, although I don't have a planning voice. And I literally, I mean, it's been explained to me many times. And I had to ask again because I needed to understand that context to be able to give good legal advice if a question comes up that's related to it. So I completely understand that you've got to have a sufficient understanding of the engineering, even though none of us are engineers except Brad and Matt, so that you feel comfortable, even though you're making the policy decisions, you're not going to be actually designing the wells and things like that. So I really understand that. I just think best hear the whole presentation, then make a decision afterwards about if you want to hear more, if you want to have more time, and plan it so it fits in with your budgetary process too.
Excuse me, thank you. Go ahead.
I think I'd like to hear the Cliff Notes version tonight. And then at that point there, that I think we'll have a better idea of really what questions we have for the whole project, and we can come back and we might understand the Uplands project and have questions on the river project, or it might be the opposite way around. But I think it would be nice to have a general overview of the whole project right now, and then if we have questions, we can come back and decide if we want to bifurcate it at that time.
It's unanimous. Take it away.
Okay, so what I'm going to discuss first is the blending study, and this is the well 22, well 23 blending study. The graphic here just is to refresh your memory where the wells are located. Well 22 is in the kind of the northeast corner of the Creekside subdivision.
Matt, on your pipeline there, proposed well 23 pipeline, instead of coming down and making a turn to the left or to the west, could you make it come to the east and come down through? There's a diagonal property line there.
There was a question about that previously, and I think there was some objection by a female member of the property owner.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't.
Oh, are you kidding you?
I have
did
a
try
question.
that.
Can he be participating in this?
At this stage, yes, because if the project as designed wouldn't be going through his property.
But it's 500 feet.
Yeah, but it affects so many people the same way as it affects him, because it's part of the overall water system.
Okay.
It's not the same, I want it so people
Okay.
understand,
Okay.
it's not the same as most roads. Some roads, the same logic applies, but most of the time with roads, it affects different neighborhoods differently. But in this case, the undergrounding of the pipeline, except if we did try and go through a council person's property, doesn't affect one council member different than it affects everybody in the system.
Okay. We all heard that.
Okay, and, yeah, no problem. So, carrying on, well 23, as you may recall, is at the very north corner of the Sunnyfields property, north of the entrance road there that serves the ranches to the east. So the kind of the bottom line is our consultant, after looking at all the water quality data, and looking at the hydrogeology and the flow capabilities of these wells, subsequent to them both being the bottom sections of the wells have been plugged, if you remember. We can put well 22 into service essentially immediately without the need for any blending, and we can do the project in phases, where we put well 22 in service first. As we prepare the engineering for well 22 for the wellhead improvements, our consultant would develop a blending plan, which would be submitted to the the Division of Drinking Water, and get their input in the design for the blending piping. And well 22 wellhead improvements would be constructed. That well would be tied to the distribution system, begin providing water. We would pump the well somewhat limited for the first year and continue to monitor the water quality to make sure that we're not seeing any significant changes in water quality. And then the second phase would be to construct wellhead improvements to well 23, and initially we would use that well for landscape irrigation. So we pump at basically a significantly reduced rate, use the well for landscape irrigation at Sunnyfields Park, and we would do that also for about a year, and we would continue to take water quality samples and monitor the water quality over that year to see if there's any changes that might affect the blending plan. And then once we've confirmed that we have a stable condition at well 23, then we would construct the piping to tie the two wells together, finish the blending equipment at well 22, and begin pumping from both wells and blending the water. And right now, that plan is based on approximately a pumping capacity of approximately 325 gallons per minute from well 22 and 275 gallons per minute from well 23. So for a total of approximately 600 gallons per minute. And I will say that the easement required, where'd my cursor go? I don't know if you can see it, it's not really showing up, but the section of pipeline that runs between the two homes there, the city has we have acquired and secured that easement to run the pipe between those two homes there.
What about going across Coyote Road? We have that easement?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Coyote Creek Road is a public easement up to kind of about where the red line makes that corner and turns. So what's shown here is actually the pipe initially as it runs from well 23 southerly. There's the old road that's there between Sunnyfields Park and the adjacent property to the east. So we would, we could run the pipe through the park, but we're gonna look at the option of trying to acquire an easement from that property owner because there's already several utilities in that road, and
So we don't have that one yet?
Correct, we do not have that one yet. So we could run it through the park, but rather than tear up everything, it seemed like we have good possibility to acquire an alternate easement. But so that's essentially the summary for the upland wells and the well 22 and 23 blending study. Maybe I should pause, answer any questions on this before I move to the river wells?
I have a question here, and I'm trying to figure out if I did the math right. But at 600 gallons a minute, that would generate enough water in approximately, is it 9 hours or 90 hours that would be 1 acre foot? How many acre feet would you be?
I don't normally think of it in those terms, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
There's what, about 340,000 gallons in an acre foot?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what we do is, we look at the gallons per minute,
Mm-hmm.
and we know from historical pumping from our other wells, and the, how the demands in our system fluctuate and the water levels in the reservoir fluctuate throughout the day during the winter and all the way to the summer months. We generally pump between 8 to 16 hours a day from our wells, usually about around 10, but between 8 and 16 hours a day. And then we know that we can't always pump 12 months out of the year. We can't pump every single day, 365 days of the year, because there's some service that the well needs to receive, and there's maintenance and things we need to do. Sometimes things break and the pump will be out of service temporarily. And so to be conservative, we only assume we're going to be able to pump 10 months out of the year. So the gallons per minute, the number of hours per day, and the number of months, we use that to calculate the acre feet.
Well,
per year.
I think the way, I actually used my calculator this time, and I came up with 9.44 hours would develop right at an acre foot at a 600 gallon pumping rate, so, okay. So, and you figure that we use it maybe 100, so that would still give us, 100 days at that kind of day, 1/3 of the time, that would give us 100 acre feet a year off these combined wells, which would be.
Oh, no, off these combined wells, if you look at the summary table that we provided, actually, let me. So this table shows you the estimated acre feet per year, based on, you see a little asterisk there in the footnote there. That's based on 12 hours a day of pumping, 300 days of the year, so approximately 10 months out of the year. So the combined would be close to 400 acre feet per year.
Okay, that's.
So that would cover approximately 1/3 of our demand. That, like, for example, last year our demand was just under 1,200 acre feet with the drought regulations and everything. I'll bring that table back up at the end, but any other questions on the blending study or? No? Okay.
Now, I'm going to ask you for some more information that's not here, I don't think. When I do a well for a client,
Mhm.
I always get to see what the content of the water is, and you just point out the things that are not good.
Correct.
Can we see that? It's just my own curiosity.
Oh, sure. I mean,
I
you
mean,
want
it
to say
gives
right
me,
now, or?
no, it just
Then
gives
I
me a
don't have
point
it.
of reference as to how, I look at an individual well and what our city wells look like.
Yeah. Well, I believe it's over 100 different
Right.
water quality parameters that are tested. And so especially when you first drill a well and first do the test pumping, for a municipal well anyway, we're required to do what they call Title 22 water quality testing, which is we test for the whole long list of everything that the state requires. And so for each of these wells, we have done that. The new wells that we constructed, or that we drilled rather, we have that water quality data for all those wells. And And for well 23 and 22, we have that water quality data before we installed the plug. And then the parameters that looked problematic, we had those retested after. So we have those before and after the bottom section of the wells were plugged for both wells. Yeah. But yeah, certainly if you want to, you know, I could email that you
Okay.
this week or.
Okay, that'd be great, anytime.
Is there any particular well you'd like to see
Well,
that?
I'd like to see 22 and 23
Oh, okay, sure.
right now. I don't mean right now, but now.
Yeah, yeah. Got it, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the alternative well construction methods. So essentially, our consultant looked at a variety of different alternatives and how we could construct the wells, mainly because there's a lot of sensitivity about doing work in the river bottom, and different methods of drilling wells can produce wells of different capacity and have different costs and different risks. And let me just, I'm gonna just scroll through this here. So this diagram identifies the locations DH5, DH6A, and DH4 where we did soil borings. And so we were able to get information on exactly all the different soil types down till we hit bedrock in each of those locations. This is a diagram that illustrates the slant well concept. This was taken from another project, but the diagram was nice to show how the well's drilled at an angle, and the screen section of the well would go at the bottom, but underneath the alluvium material in the riverbed. Then the next type of well that was looked at is called a collector well. That's where they drill basically or excavate a caisson, a shaft, a large diameter shaft that goes down, and then using bore and jack methods, they bore and jack these horizontal collector pipes that are screened. So that was a second method that was evaluated. And in this case, you know, that caisson shaft can be set back further out of the main flow channel to be a little bit better protected. But
Matt, when they're doing those the collectors going out there, is there? This looked very symmetrical in the drawing, but you can choose where you're going. You can send
correct.
Send an array all out river-wise, and you don't have to send them backwards or anything like that, right?
Correct. Yeah, that is correct. You need a little bit of spacing just for constructability purposes between each one, but yeah, you can send them, group them together however you like.
Okay.
Okay, then the third method that we looked at is basically HDD stands for horizontal directional drilling, and horizontal directional drilling is done quite a bit to install pipelines. So it's a very well tested technology for constructing pipelines, but it's still very experimental in terms of use for wells. And generally the way it works is you see the piece of equipment there, they They set the desired angle and have a boring head that drills down, and they can manipulate the piece of equipment to adjust the direction and the depth and the angle of the boring head. And generally what happens is you'll pop back up. They'll go under a road or under a river. This is how we did the sewer force main from Fjord Drive over into the wastewater treatment plant. And then from the far end where the drilling head pops out, you attach a string of pipe and pull it back as you extract the drilling pipe. You pull in your carrier pipe. But for wells, it's still highly experimental, so there's a high level of risk associated with this. As you can see, there's no real way to set any kind of gravel pack around the well screen. The well screen material that's available is also still very experimental, has not been used extensively. So this method, although there's some attractive features of it, it's still very experimental, highly risky, and therefore not recommended by the staff. Oops. So this table essentially summarizes the results of the alternative drilling methods technical memo, and you can see that the vertical wells is really the least risky, and it's the highest expected yield of gallons per minute per dollars. So although the total capacity, because the length of well screen is more limited with vertical wells than the other wells, you have a more limited well screen, so the overall total production from the well is vertical wells would be less than the other three methods, but it's the least costly and least costly per gallon per minute, and it's definitely the lowest risk because it's the tried and true technology, just the way we've been drilling wells all over San Ynez Valley for years. Would be the same methods basically employed for the vertical wells, and so this table pretty much summarizes the results. Our consultant is definitely, they're heavily recommending the use of vertical well, traditional construction well drilling method. So then the next technical evaluation they did, or technical memo study they did, was looking at, based on proceeding with a vertical well drilling method, they looked at the hydrogeologic conditions. Again, we did soil borings, so they had all that information. They did extensive research on other studies and work that's been done in this general area. They were able to reference Hopkins Groundwater Consulting is the firm that assisted the Alsal Ranch in drilling their wells, river wells. So we were able to review those reports as well. And there's a few references to information in that report from Curtis Hopkins. And just want to just scroll down to So this diagram just shows you all of the locations along the river where we took, where there were existing well information or where we did additional soil borings. So the three So the, both the top and bottom view are profile views, but the bottom view is exaggerated, just for clarity. And so over here, these are the 3 borings we did at the end of the Fjord Drive extension. So if you went to the end of Fjord Drive and you stopped at that guardrail there, and then just continued walking out towards the Buell Flat area, kind of towards the back side of the Mission Concrete ready-mix plant, we took 3. The city has road right-of-way along there, utility and road right-of-way along that stretch. It's an 80-foot wide utility and road right-of-way. So we looked at, well, we wouldn't need to acquire any easements in that area. Let's take some soil borings and see what we find, see if we can put a well there. And then we also did the borings closer to our existing well 3. So that's these 3 soil borings here. So this diagram here shows LSL Ranch well number 2 here, LSL Ranch well number 3, the city's existing well number 3, and the yellow dots here are the boring locations along the river, the bank of the river there, and A400 and B400 are the recommended locations if the city were to proceed with only 2 wells along the river in this section. Now, I'll remind you, we haven't secured any easements for any of this yet, so that would have to be done. But at any rate, those are the two locations, and those wells are, if we install 2, the consultant's recommending we have a spacing of approximately 400 feet between the 2. And if we go with, so that's a profile along the river. And so this is the bedrock down here and the alluvium. This is the LSL, the 2 LSL wells and the city's well. These are the soil boring locations. So they're recommending, these would be the locations. And that's kind of like a profile of the well, showing the well screen, this area here. So again, that's if the city were to proceed with 2 wells. If we were to proceed with 3 wells, they would recommend a spacing of approximately 300 feet. And I should mention that they did a pretty rigorous analysis to determine that at a spacing of basically 200 feet, we'll have very minimal well interference because of the high transmissivity of the gravel that's there. It allows water to pass through it so well that you only need a spacing of approximately 200 feet to be less than half a foot of interference in the groundwater level.
That diagram about the straws that are stuck down in there, they all drill into the bedrock. Is there a reason to go into the bedrock?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yes, just slightly. What we do is we drill about 15 feet below that, and so the casing pipe that would go down, that last 15 feet in the bedrock would not have a well screen. It would be a solid walled casing, and that's where the pump would reside. And so the water can come in those screens, flood that sort of depression, that hole below the screen, and pump out of that. Otherwise, if you just stopped at the bottom and your well's right there, you have less ability to pull the full amount of water in.
Good. Thank you.
So that's the 3-well alternative. And that shows you. So the one thing I did want to point out, if you look at well C300, you see the bedrock starting to come up there, and they do believe that this well would have lower capacity. And I was just going to show you here also. You'll notice to fit that well in, we'd also have to be well within the the 150-foot distance. This dashed blue line is that 150-foot buffer. We're able to pump without any restrictions when the water in the river is more than 150 feet away from the well. So A300 and B300, we would rarely have to stop pumping. But C300, whenever there's water flowing in the river on the surface, we would have to stop pumping. So it's already getting into a thinner section of the alluvium, or alluvial, and it's also within that area where we would have to shut it off periodically. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that's.
Matt?
Yes.
Go back to if you could go back to the photograph that showed the, yeah, back, yeah, okay, where the current, or, at C300.
Yes.
If you go line straight south to the opposite riverbank, how wide is the river at that point? The riverbed?
You know, I don't know exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's the A300, B300, and C300, those are spaced at 300 feet. So the lower portion of the river right there is probably about 400 feet wide.
400, 450?
Yeah, you've got a scale in the bottom right corner.
Yeah, so, okay. So actually.
Yeah, it's just hard to see. There's sort of like a double shelf along parts of the.
Yeah. Engineer. Because the only reason I'm saying that is, you know, looking right now, the river channel is running to the north in the old riverbed. I remember probably back in 66, 67, before we had the big flood of 69, you see, if you take a look, you'll see some on the map, the photograph there, there's a straight band of brush that's going across from the left to right. That's where the channel ran back in the mid 60s. So that whole channel can swing back and forth a considerable distance on that one. So,
yes, that
so
is,
it's one of those things
yeah.
that where it's 150 feet away today, it could be 300 feet after a real heavy rainstorm or real heavy rain, where the whole river channel just does change.
Yeah, every time there's been a release from Lake Kachuma during the winter because of high levels in Lake Kachuma, these low flow channels shift around. Yeah, it happens every time.
Can you mechanically change that flow in the riverbed by cutting ways through it? Is that
That's physically possible, but we would never be able to get a permit from the California Department of Fish and
permitted,
Wildlife for
okay.
that. Yeah, they
has
wouldn't
to be
allow it.
natural?
For the
Yeah.
Army Corps either.
Yeah. So, yeah, that would be a nice solution if we could do that. But so that's essentially the summary of this hydrogeology technical memo. Staff leans more towards the 2-well option because we know that the Alisal Ranch would like the city to at least one day move city well number 3. And so if we were going to move that downstream a little bit, having 3 wells there, that would really create a cramped condition and not a desirable alternate location to put well number 3, when we, at such time we are ready to replace it. So the 2-well option gives us more flexibility to move well 3 in the future, once it's lived out its full useful life. But anyway, so that pretty much summarizes the hydrogeology technical memo. And
Matt, what's the projected full useful life of well 3? Is there one?
That well should easily reach a 50-year life, and I'm trying to remember the year that well was drilled. I think it should easily have 20 more years of life. It was installed with a stainless steel casing, so
Okay.
it's good.
So it's not an imminent thing in the next
Well,
5 years?
There
No,
are other
no.
considerations with well 3 because the Alisal has riparian rights, and their rights to make use of water from the river are superior to ours, even though we're downstream. It's not with streams that flow just completely above ground. If you're downstream, you can pump without fear of interfering with the upstream users' rights, and it's not a problem. With underground systems like this, a well like is that A3?
7A is
7A.
upstream, yeah.
That well has the potential to interfere with the superior users' rights. So you might have some other considerations as far as the useful life of that well, because we don't want to get into a spot where we have to defend the well against someone with a superior legal right. So
There's a couple just quick things that you might want to note. This bank actually is a pretty nice location for wells, because at the Alisal Ranch well 2 and at their well 3, they have riprap kind of like groins or jetties that have been built up over their discharge piping. So once the water comes to the wellhead, and their piping that runs back over, so that tends to protect. That provides a little added protection for this portion of the north bank of the river. And you'll notice that the distance between that Alisal Ranch chose to drill between these two wells, that distance right there is just slightly more than the distance between the city's well and their well number 2. So I think this gives a little clue to the separation that they should be concerned about, since they chose that themselves when they drilled those. But anyway, okay, so that's, any questions on that? So then just quickly, I'm gonna kind of jump to the reservoirs. That'll be pretty brief. Here's a photo of Reservoir 2. This facility here on the left is a Verizon wireless facility, and this is a truck. When we had the well last video inspected, they sent a camera down into the tank and took photographs, and actually had a diver that entered the tank and inspected. So that's Reservoir 2. It's on the top of what's referred to as Chalk Hill.
How many gallon capacity is that tank?
I'm glad you asked. This is a diagram of the city's distribution system, water distribution system, and that reservoir has a capacity of 450,000 gallons. That's the nominal capacity. So you note in the staff report, I reference it as 423,000 gallons. And that's because you can't use the very upper portion. There's an overflow weir so that the water doesn't press on the bottom of the roof. And then the discharge piping comes in the side wall of the reservoir, and it's about 1.5 feet off the bottom of the floor of the reservoir. So that last little 1.5 feet on the bottom, you can't use. It's non-usable. So if we were to replace the reservoir, we would do an alternate design where that piping comes in the bottom. The outlet piping comes right in the bottom, and you could drain it, right down. The nice thing about that also is, if you have to service the reservoir, you don't have to waste any water. You just drain it all the way down and close the valve, and you haven't wasted any water. But anyway, so these are the photos in the staff report showing the existing corrosion now on that reservoir. This is on the roof of the reservoir. These are where we have the cathodic protection system. We have sacrificial anodes that hang down into the tank, and That's where those are fastened, on the roof of the reservoir. So there's a couple photos like that. That's,
It looks like the reservoir is corroding instead of the anodes.
yeah, yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it would be much worse if without that system, but it,
They don't take care of it.
yeah. So, anyway, so the reason we're bringing this up is, the city council has a goal and an objective of, providing additional, water storage in our distribution system, and, which is definitely needed. Right now, we do have trouble meeting the peak, demands when we have a heat wave, in the summer. Actually, the last couple of years, because of the drought and all the cutbacks, we've been okay. But in 2011 and 2012, we were really close to situations where we would have to go and open up our connections with ID1 in order to meet the demand, which we can do that. It'll work, and but it's, you know, it's not cost effective. And we also, it would be beneficial to have additional fire storage in our distribution system. So these are just photos of some of that corrosion. And I was just going to mention, this is our water system facilities map. And so the different shaded colors are our pressure zones. So the concept would be, at some point, to replace Reservoir 2 with the larger reservoir up here on Chalk Hill, and then increase the capacity by approximately 300,000 gallons. And then at some point in the future also, we have these two cisterns that are on the Alisal Ranch, two 20,000 gallon cisterns on that same site, or approximately that same location. We would eventually one day replace those with a 200,000 gallon reservoir to match our other 200,000 gallon reservoir out there, Reservoir 3, that's already out there. So we'd have a pair of 200,000 gallon reservoirs. So, so this table.
How many gallons, oops, how many gallons in the reservoir on Alisal Road at the top?
Yeah.
Does that say that here?
Yep. 600,000 gallons. So this is the summary, and essentially, as the city manager mentioned, we're looking for direction. Right now, it looks like it's going to take several months to work out the issues with the Alisal Ranch and ID1 regarding our two petitions regarding our river wells. Once that's resolved, if that moves forward successfully, then we still need to acquire the easements. And the property owner that we've talked to, Bob Wright, who owns the properties there along Fjord Drive, he's indicated willingness to work with the city, but at this point, they would like to see that the city's petition gets approved to expand our reach of diversion to that area, because right now we don't actually have the right to drill wells in that area. So so once that's secured, we'll work on obtaining those easements. So one possible approach would be, over the next year, just focus on resolving everything with the petitions and acquiring those easements. And then, so after next year, then move forward with the river wells. And we would recommend the 2 wells, which we looked at. But since we don't know what's going to happen with the drought, if the drought were to continue 2 or 3 more years, especially here in Southern California, yeah, we're getting some water from Northern California, but Lake Cachuma is Santa Barbara and Goleta and Montecito's primary water supply source. And if that was completely empty, then there would be no water for fish releases or water rights releases. So essentially, our river wells would go dry. So you'd be spending all this money, and if the drought were to continue, potentially not be able to extract water using those wells. So it kind of comes down to, unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball, but if we do know that if we proceeded with well 22, we could equip that well and actually get water, within a year. If you guys given staff the go-ahead, we could do that. And if our petition is requesting a 15-year time extension, so one of the concepts that we're proceeding based on is along the river wells, we would try to do these first 2 wells, and then at some future point, try to secure easements further downstream. So right now, the Buell Flat quarry property owners, the Petersons, have told us they're not interested in discussing with the city or granting us or selling us any easements or anything. But 10 years from now, that might change. And so we might be able to get some additional easements downstream, further downstream. And then as far as Reservoir 2 is concerned, we can spend the estimate to basically sandblast it, repair inside and out, repair all the corrosion areas, add a new vent to the top of the reservoir, to recoat the inside and out, and to replace with an upgraded cathodic protection system. That's approximately $310,000. That'd give us an additional 20-year life to that storage reservoir. So that's a perfectly fine alternative. It is kind of spending a lot of money that's not getting us any closer to your goals and objective of having additional storage. So the other option would be to tear that reservoir down. It's a 60-foot diameter reservoir. We would replace it with approximately 70-foot diameter reservoir. That's 4 feet taller, and we might have to lower the floor of the reservoir 2 or 3 feet, and we would notch that. The site already has a big retaining wall notched in the side of the hill on the back side of the reservoir, and there's about a 12-foot gap between that retaining wall and the wall of the reservoir. So we would propose to construct a pre-stressed concrete reservoir that would be partially buried, and so that extra 10 feet in diameter would be just pushed right. They would demo that retaining wall and push it right into that hill the way the existing retaining wall is. So the top of the reservoir would essentially be very close to the same elevation, so no change there, and just a little bit bigger diameter. The floor would be dropped a few feet, and that would give us an additional, I think, 327,000 gallons of additional storage. Of course, that's a $1.85 million project. So we just wanted to bring that before we spend a bunch of money to, do this repair work. We wanted you to have the opportunity to give us direction.
What happens
Question?
to all the other additions that are up on that hill? How are they affected?
All the other,
Well, like all the cell sites that are up there and the block buildings that are up there.
yeah, right now there's pretty good separation from the existing reservoir and all those facilities. So that would make the construction a little bit more challenging or complicated, but it's nothing that couldn't be done.
Other question on, with a pre-stressed concrete tank that you're proposing, what does that do for our maintenance? Because right now we have the steel tank where we're having the corrosion problems.
Right,
I'm assuming we would not have a lot less corrosion with the pre-stressed concrete tank?
Correct. With the pre-stressed concrete tank, we would not need a cathodic protection system, so we wouldn't have to pay somebody, a cathodic protection firm to come up and adjust it and replace components and parts and stuff. So that would be eliminated, and we wouldn't have a corrosion problem, basically.
And we gain, basically, okay, your 327,000 gallons of the tank, that's basically an acre foot of storage in that particular tank.
Right, right.
Mr. Deuce?
Backing way up to the easements. I seem to recall a year or so ago when we were talking about this, that the state was reluctant to act without an easement. And we were having this discussion that property owner won't act without us having.
Right, as a kind of catch-22.
Yeah, as catch-22. Has that been resolved now, or are we still there?
Well,
We're still there.
It's been resolved from the state's perspective, because we did provide them with information that we had contacted the property owner and that we'd begun communication with them, and I think that satisfied them from their end. But yeah, it's not been resolved from the property owner perspective of acquiring the easements.
So the property owner won, the state.
Correct.
So we're not stuck in the middle now. The state is out of the way for the most part.
That's our understanding so far, yeah.
Okay.
That they're satisfied with us having made initial contact. And we actually drafted up, we had hired a surveyor and drafted up easement documents. So we provided those to them, showing them that, hey, these are the easements we're trying to acquire. And so they saw that, we've really taken some steps towards that.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Regarding costs, could this be considered a public works project rather than a water fund project and allow the costs to be directly out of reserves or out of the general fund?
Yeah, certainly it's up to you how you want to pay for any project that the city does.
That's an approach that,
Well, it's a water expense, but as you've done in the past, you can use general funds to supplement the enterprise fund.
it just looks like an overall benefit for the city rather than for the consumers, in my mind. So as a public works project, and then it would be financed out of some reserves we could pay out over time and that kind of thing.
Just think of it exactly as your city manager expressed. It's just what funds you use, and you have the power to use general funds to the benefit of your enterprise funds, not the other way around.
Right.
So you can always expend general fund money on any project in an enterprise fund. But what we can't do is
Reverse that process, right.
expend water payments on the road.
I think from an accounting standpoint, to keep the water fund from going negative by borrowing to pay for these processes, or those things, if we took it out of the general fund or out of reserves, as a public works project rather than a water project. Just a thought.
Well, that reminded me of a couple last comments I wanted to make. So the way this is structured gives you a lot of flexibility as we go into this next water and sewer rate study. For example, if you choose to replace Reservoir 2, well, with what we would propose is that we do the engineering work in 4 or 5 years, because we could just leave the reservoir the way it is, just put a few Band-Aids on it basically right now, get another 5 years life out of it, and that cost won't hit till the next 5-year rate cycle. So that's one option. And then you can kind of do the same thing with the uplands and the river wells, basically have one follow the other, where the larger construction expenses of the second project is in the next 5-year funding cycle. So that way you can sort of manage the amount of expense and capital improvement in this next 5-year cycle, and therefore control the possible rates a little bit better.
That's kind of what my thinking was, is if we don't dump funds into the water project, just keep it separate. The rate study would indicate a lower rate going forward.
Well, not a lower
For
rate,
any kind of construction like
less
that.
of an increase.
Less, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other question remains is, do we want to prepare for a drought by having a larger reservoir, or do we want to prepare for the drought by having a continuous flow of water?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a common misconception, misunderstanding. Having the larger reservoirs will not help us in any way with the drought. It only will help us with meeting fire flow demands, if there's like multiple fires, and it'll help us meet the peak day demands. So what happens is, in the summertime, when we have all the tourists here and everybody on the weekend and everybody's flushing their toilet and taking showers and cooking, all the restaurants are, you know, at full steam, the water level in those reservoirs drops like a rock. And our water operators, they're like, you know, running around doing everything they can, making sure the wells are running, and that we adjust our state water, you know, connection, that interconnect, adjust the flow rate coming in there, and then, if necessary, make a phone call to ID1 and let them know we need to open up the interconnects. So, yeah, so it's mainly for additional fire protection, and having more storage so that those water levels don't approach the bottom of the reservoir, you know, during the peak in the morning and the evening in the summer.
That helps make up my mind. Are there any other questions?
You
of
know,
staff?
you mentioned the cisterns out on the ranch. What, do you have a time frame on that one?
I believe that we had that listed in the 10-year capital improvement plan, but it was not, a date was not identified. It was actually just listed as kind of a placeholder as beyond the 10-year forecast.
Elevation-wise, and I know they're in two different zones. What's the elevation like on that cistern area?
You know, I looked at that several years ago. They're not at the same elevation. We might have to get some additional easement or something in that vicinity, but I believe that they're about 20 feet difference in elevation, and so most of our reservoirs are 24 to 28 feet. So it would, we feel like we could manage that, and it wouldn't be a problem. But you are correct; they aren't at exactly the same elevation, and we'd have to look at that. But the engineering for that, we haven't done that.
From a cost standpoint, and I realize that you know, 200,000 gallons is a lot different than 750. What kind of costs has that been worked on yet? What
Oh,
or is there a general
that-
rule of thumb?
Well, if you have an existing site, kind of like for Reservoir 2, where we have the site and everything, and the piping's already run up there, there's not extensive amount of piping that would have to be redone and all. It's between $1 and $1.50 per gallon is the cost.
Okay.
And
So we could
steel tank is,
anticipate on the cisterns then that it would be more, because you would have to bring piping and.
yeah, there would be more grading work and site work involved with that.
So you could maybe go $2 a gallon.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it'd be more like the $1.50.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's closer to $1 a gallon if you have the.
If you have everything
site and
set.
everything's
Oh,
kinda
okay,
more
okay.
set.
All right.
Yeah, it's close to $1.50 a gallon. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I have a question. So was there any consideration in doing Alisal Ranch, you know, maybe making up the difference to get that number that we want, whatever it is, rather than tearing down the Chalk Hill?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that. In fact, the problem is we don't want to have too much of our storage south of the river. It's connected to the city with the 12-inch, the south side of the river, or Alisal Ranch area, is connected to the rest of the city with the 12-inch pipeline. And so there's a lot of like frictional losses or pressure losses if you're having to bring that water from way over there and fight a fire, you know, in the main part of town. So so we did look at that, but we felt that it wouldn't be prudent to have, you know, the bulk of our storage kind of so isolated on a long dead-end, you know, straw. And a lot of times there are fires associated with earthquakes, and so if there was an earthquake, even though we're doing this seismic retrofit project, you know, the pipelines could rupture and things like that. Although we have an opportunity at the cistern site to in the future get a little more storage, we felt that it's probably better to get the storage more on the north side of the town where the bulk of the demand is. And it's not isolated by that one, you know, line.
Only comment I'm going to make is in regards to the repair of Reservoir 2 and replace Reservoir 2. If you figure the cost and the lifetime of the repair or the new build and the capacity, the dollar per, or the cost per gallonage comes up to about there's a half a cent difference between the two. The repair job comes up to like over the 20-year lifespan, equivalent of about 3.5 cents a gallon per year. The replace the reservoir comes up to about 4 cents per gallon for the whole year. If you figure up the capacity of the reservoir, the cost, and the time frame of the life of the reservoir. So it's one of those things that, you know, you get the extra gallonage, but if you get down to the bottom line, it comes out just about apples and apples, not apples and oranges. So you have to take a look at long-term and short-term, because if we go with a short-term repair on the Reservoir 2, in 20 years, we're going to have to be coming up with a bunch of money again to do the project. And at that point, there will be another, you know, a far higher cost than it is now. So, you know, if we want to take a look at the long term, I would really, my personally opinion is would be to go for the replace Reservoir 2. But will be decided as we go with our budgeting.
Are there any more questions? Staff report. Seeing none, we'll go to the audience for public comment. I have no speaker slips. Does anybody wish to comment? Jeff, come on up.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Jeff Clay, representing ID1. I wanted to comment on the river well portion of agenda item 6, and I couldn't help but notice that in closed session, you'll be addressing the permit 15878, and I know you're all in possession of the letter from the district to the city. Just wanted to reiterate the district's position on that, and I know that Chris has met with Brad about this, and you know, we didn't file the protest at all to stand in opposition of you guys. On the contrary, it just buys us 6 months in order to talk about this and get the highest and best use for this water for the valley. And I know that the Alisol filed a protest as well, and I think all our interests line up perfectly, and I just wanted you to know that we're excited and really want to work with you on this and see the development of those wells to the west of the bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for action. Who wants to start? Well, first, I'd like to say, Matt, good job. You made it easy for me. Thank you.
Cliff notes do work.
Yes, they do.
I can start it
Do
off.
we? Well, let's start at how we want to proceed in the overall summation of this chart. Which sections do we want to pull out to pursue, and which ones don't we? And those sorts of questions.
Prioritizing on getting water to store, I think would probably be at number 1. So, and I would say well 22 and 23. Are we all in the same agreement with that? Seems like the most logical, right? So
Yeah, I would
22,
say those uplands. That would be the way to go.
Yeah, and then
It'd be the
river wells and
quickest.
a patch job on the storage, and I guess we could figure out in the future what we want to do exactly, rebuild or a full patch job of 300,000 or whatever it is.
Any other thoughts?
What was the patch job? 20,000 or something like that?
Yeah, just to do some minor repairs, yeah, it'd be about 20,000, I think.
Okay. And what would we gain from it? Like another year or two?
That would be with the goal of getting 5 more years. But what's gonna happen is it's gonna deteriorate, but it's gonna hold it together. It's kind of like duct tape and baling wire, you know?
Mhm.
It'll hold it together till we are ready to replace it. But
So that would
deterioration would continue.
that
It
would
would just,
okay. So if we Band-Aid it together, then we're definitely headed towards replacement,
yeah.
rather
A
than
5-year
Yes.
time frame.
yes, yeah.
In a 5-year time frame, then.
Yeah, that would be the goal. We would tailor the maintenance to get another 5 years of life out of it.
okay.
So do you think should we just redo do the sandblasting and do all the recoating and just put the cistern or whatever on Alisol? And just get the 20 years out of it?
I'm not sure I follow what you're.
So rather than rebuilding, do the full repair, full contract repair and start that now, so then we have a reservoir now, or this year, say. And then for that additional storage, we just do Alisol.
Oh, in order to.
Rather
in
than
order to
spend almost
obtain
2
the-
million on a new reservoir.
I think we need to listen to what Matt said about where we want the water storage to be.
Yeah.
He wants it to be on the north side of the river for safety reasons.
But I think we're putting the storage out on Alisol regardless, right?
Not right now.
Not right now.
No, that's
No, that would be.
not
yeah,
even,
that's projected beyond 10 years.
that's not even one of the items here.
We could make it less than 10 years though, right? I mean,
Yeah, you can, whatever your pleasure is. Yeah, certainly.
But, okay, I'll finish. I'll wait till my turn.
So the suggestion so far is well 22, 23, and a reservoir repair, whether it be extensive or not, whether it be extensive, the
Yeah.
$20,000 or the $310,000 repair. Now, at the $20,000 repair, could we do several of those over time, or is the deterioration going to be too great?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we'd be doing is we'd kind of be sort of like smearing Bondo over the rust spots, which, we won't be able to like cut them out and replace them with good steel and recoat anything. And, we spend about $1,000 a year to maintain the cathodic protection system, but it's quite old. It was installed with the original reservoir. And, as you can,
Do you
it's not-
see the costs of delaying the 1.8 million to 5 years? Could we afford to do that without impacting our other projects? Is that a good structural use of the money?
I think we need to wait to see in the rate study, water and sewer rate study. Yeah, I haven't done the financial analysis to that degree.
Would our rate study, could we have it include the fact that the funding would come out of the general fund also? So we could see the impact of the rates?
The rate study would have various alternatives, and they would include having the rates pay and which projects you can pay for with general fund money, and you would make those decisions after you see the study, include all the information.
What I keep looking at is, and this is not taking capacity into consideration at all, we would get 40% of the life if we're comparing the repair to the new one for a sixth of the cost.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, and that is not taking capacity into that equation at all. It's just pure time and dollars.
Yeah, I did want to mention the life expectancy of a pre-stressed concrete reservoir is about 15, maybe 20 years greater than for a steel reservoir.
And what's a steel reservoir's life?
For another 1.5 million.
Generally, they assume 50 years, which, you know, if you have ideal conditions, you can extend that a little bit, which is what we would try to do with this. Yeah.
Right. When was Reservoir Two initially constructed?
Early 80s, wasn't it?
I can't remember. It's
Late 70s, early 80s?
that's what I'm thinking, but I really can't remember. I think it was after I got out of the Navy, and that was in '76. So that's, if it's in '76, we're pushing 40 years on that reservoir, which is pushing it to the, you said a steel reservoir is normally about a 50-year lifespan.
Yeah, I apologize. There's an error on there. The 50-year life is applicable to like a newly constructed steel reservoir. It's about a 70-year life for a pre-stressed concrete reservoir.
So if you go with a 70-year life, that means the cost per capacity, per construction, actually would even drop lower than my figure that I came up
So
with.
okay, so it's just the year that should be 70 instead of 50. The price is for the concrete?
Correct. All the prices are correct.
Okay, thank you.
So we can extend the life in effect to another 50 years or thereabouts for another $1.5 million. That's what we're saying. But going to the new reservoir, otherwise we'll get 20 years out for a third of $1 million, and then we'll get 50 to 70 out for another $1.5 million on top of that.
Correct. Of
Yeah.
a larger reservoir with the
Yeah.
added storage.
So that
You can't compare apples, you can't compare them like that.
Yeah, it's
One's big.
Because I think you also have to take a look at, you know, you get, you know, the cost of one, I think, but the one you also have to look at is you're going to have close to 100%, or about a 70% increase in capacity of the reservoir. You're going from,
Yeah, one is just a maintenance project, the other is increasing storage. I mean, they're not really apples.
They are
Oh, going up to 70 years, that all of a sudden starts leaning heavily over towards the replacement.
can we give the staff some direction?
Okay, I'm going to agree with, I think we all agree that the 22 and 23 would be the priority, which would get us going quick. And I think we really need to have a little bit more information on the replacing the reservoir and the repair of the reservoir. And it's, like I said, I in particular, as Councilman Dew said, if with a 70-year lifespan, that even pushes me more to the replacing the reservoir and to get the additional capacity. My question is, doing the replacing of the reservoir, what does, you know, obviously the existing reservoir has to be removed. What are we going to do for water during the period of construction? Buy a lot of stock in Arrowhead Water Company.
No fires allowed.
Yeah, well, the construction schedule would be such that the existing reservoir wouldn't be torn down
It'd be built
until
around
like
it.
November 1st, when you're kind of out of the main fire season. And what essentially happens is you close a valve just below the reservoir, and you end up having to pump water a lot more. So we'll probably have to coordinate with ID1 and have one of those interconnects open, and we'll probably have to turn our state water connection up a little bit to make up the difference. And then we'll be ramping our wells. We'll turn on and off to meet those peaks. And so we'll have to run the wells maybe a few more hours each day and play around with it like that. But
And I'm also going to assume, because matter of fact, at the last League of California Cities meeting, I actually stopped by and was looking at a company that makes the pre-stressed reservoir, and they are pretty much king size Lego sets. They manufacture everything, and they basically bring the sections in, and you know, once they have the base down, that's pretty much a fairly I won't say easy, but a fairly, a highly efficient system
Yeah.
of putting the thing back together again, so, okay.
Do we know time, length of time
Oh, that
to
the
construct it?
existing reservoir will
No,
be out of...
no, construct a new one.
Oh, yeah, it's like more or less a one-year project. Yeah.
You know, pushing this thing out 20 years isn't a bad option. We can buy 20 years' time, only $300,000 in compared to the 1.8, take the remaining 1.5 and drill the wells, and then we know we have water to store.
That's my thing.
I mean, that seems like the right thing to do, right? I mean, it's $300,000, 20 years. We can drill a lot of wells in 20 years and store a lot of water.
Yeah, one of your other goals is water independence. So that accomplishes one of your goals as well. So it's just a matter of what, you know.
Not deplete our cash, and we could probably do that. Can we budget it for this year? Something like that, maybe? And
Yeah,
have a nice-
basically, currently in the draft budget, it's some sort of like overloaded because we've got both projects in there, not the reservoir. We've got the 310 for the reservoir repairs, but for the wells, we have budget for continuing engineering work on the river wells and budget for doing the engineering work for well 22. And so based on your direction, we'll delete one of those from the proposed budget. Either delete the engineering work for well 22 or delete the engineering work for the river wells, which we may want to do that anyway because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's going to take us a while to work out and resolve all the issues with the petitions for the next year and then secure those easements. So we wouldn't want to get too far along in the engineering work for the river wells until we get the easements and know exactly where they're going to go, you know?
Yeah, and this exercise is also going to be used as we move forward with our rate study, because they're going to look at your 10-year plan and how that rate structure fits with your 10-year capital plan. So I think we've got enough guidance to start putting those numbers in the slots for both the current year and the next
Do
5-year
we need a
cycle.
motion to cover all this, or?
No, I think we have adequate direction.
No, you haven't taken any action tonight, so you don't need
Right.
a motion. You're just giving staff direction. So the budget comes back in a way that you understand, and that's when you'll be making decisions actually on expenditures. And you've also given enough staff direction that can help with a rate study in the future so that it includes all the right information to answer finally all the questions you've been addressing tonight. So then you'll make a decision as well.
Would you repeat to us our
Yeah,
direction?
what's our direction?
Well, your priorities were well 22 and 23.
Right.
And you want to continue on with at least the design work on the river petitions and work towards getting that resolved. And then I think I heard just the small term fix on the reservoir for now.
The 20,000 or the 310?
The 310.
310 is what we
310.
understood.
And you'll have, actually, now you'll be more informed as we bring you that draft budget, which you're going to be seeing in 2 council meetings. So I think then you'll have time to refine those and see how that works, because the big nut at the end of this is going to be the negative number at the bottom of the, you'll be using up all your water reserves to do this. So we just wanted to get that information in front of you, show you that, see how it all lines up for the next budget, and then also for the rate study. So I think this was a great exercise. I think Matt did an excellent job
I do too,
explaining
I
it
think.
to everyone, and we appreciate
Ease
it.
my mind. Thank you, Matt. Item 7 is a discussion of direction. Is that, have we got time to take a break?
Yeah, we're going to take a time.
Okay, well, let's come back at 8:45.
I got to stretch.
Direction for ad hoc committee with the San Ynez River Water Conservation District Number 1.
Staff report?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this item is brought before you because of last meeting, one of your council member Zimmerman requested that they get, as an ad hoc committee, get direction from the council on the potential merger with ID1 as they've been meeting, and I think they're looking for some direction on that. just as a little background, you formed the committee in July 27th of 2015, and the two members are Councilmember Deuce and Zimmerman. And that initial committee was to talk about the CCWA membership, and then that kind of evolved into a potential merger, because I think the council directed if there was going to be, or ID1 actually talked about detachment if there was going to be a membership request from CCWA, and so that became talk about a merger, potentially regional merger. So I think the two committee members may have more information. Staff has not been in attendance at the subcommittee meeting, so I'll let maybe them bring forward what they're looking for and where they're at with the ID1 ad hoc committee, and get some direction from council on that.
Can we have a report from the ad hoc committee?
It seems to me we reported on this after the last committee, and we haven't, to my knowledge, had another meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
It was something that was just broached. It was brought up actually as a council request. So I hate to kind of bounce the ball back in your court, but here it is.
They're open to it, so.
We were following your directions.
That was your report? Can you give us an idea of the kind of progress you made in your last meting? Is there a meeting of the minds? Is there
Well,
some
it was
thoughts of the
it was something that we just broached. ID1 was going to take it back to their full group. We were going to take it back to our full group, which we did, and so here we are now. Remind me, if you remember, Neil, what did we get off of our report?
It was real preliminary, so we didn't want to dig too deep because we wanted to see where the council stood before we put too much time into it. And mainly it was just how would this look? The billing, the wells, how things are divided up, so who does what services. I mean, what does that look like to Solvang if we were to do a merger with ID1? How do you guys see it as where we are?
So you really haven't set any ground rules as to
it's open game.
As to what you've
Let's put it out there and see what thoughts are out there.
And like I mentioned, just even the word merger, we are a part of it already. We're part of ID1.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we need to merge with them? We are.
That's a rhetorical question.
I think wasn't there some discussion about a potential joint study to if you were going to do it, you would do a joint study?
There was discussion about that. Yeah. My question was,
maybe save the rate
and we're just pretty much restating the report that we made, a couple months ago. What kind of direction do you remember that we got after from our council after that what was it, February meeting?
With ID1?
Yeah, because we came back and reported from here.
Right.
To our council. What kind of response did we get back, if any?
I don't think we got any.
Okay. Maybe that's why I really kind of feel that.
Yeah, we didn't get any.
Yeah,
we weren't able to really discuss it, and it just wasn't ever discussed, and then we had to get on the agenda, I think, to officially discuss the item.
The discussion initially was about CCWA joining that, separating from ID1, so we could join CCWA, and then.
Yeah, that was the initial discussion, but one of the requests from this dais prior to that February meeting was to talk about merger.
Yeah, we were going around in circles, and it just ended up being maybe a thing where we don't have to have the responsibility of constantly running a deficit on our budget for the water department. Maybe we could share some of the costs, share some of everything, and maybe hopefully the ratepayers get to pay or get a break on their Right.
Let me ask another basic question. Does the council want to continue forward with discussion with ID1 as a possible merger?
Are they interested?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah.
Even though the rules, regulations, and conditions of what they are now, their entity will probably change.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be
Well, it would-
definite,
We have someone here that would maybe be able to speak to that. Rather than us answering for ID1, even though we are a part of ID1, let the representative.
What was the question?
Joni's question, are you interested?
is ID1 interested? Even
Yeah.
though it may throw you in a whole different category of a water corporation, whatever.
Yes, we were interested in, and basically, if I can refresh all our memories a little bit, it was, I appreciated Council Member Zimmerman just agendizing it, because I came to my board after the February meeting and brought it up, and it was kind of the sense that, well, is the city really serious about this? We don't see it on agenda. It was ad hoc meeting that took place. Is this something serious that we want to look into? And so my request, just the next step, was could you please agendize it, so, at least we know that we've got, the council is on board with this. It's just not a pie in the sky idea, because as you know, history would show us that we've entered into agreements in the past and spent money. We just want to make sure that, if we do this and spend time and money, that we're really going someplace with it. But yes, we're interested.
Why?
Well, I think...
What is the motivation of ID1 wanting to merge with our waters?
Well, first, you guys approached us with it, so, we're considering it. And I think similarly, what Neil was saying is that if we can provide the valley, the ratepayers, not only of San Ynez, but Solvang, with a better rate. Here's the thing. I mean, honestly, if I boiled this down, we do water and we know water. I think we know it and do it better than Solvang. That's just my opinion. You guys have many various and sundry things that you have to do. I mean, you guys do a lot. And I think because we do water and know water, we're experts in water, I think we can provide the best foundation or environment for all things water. And this is global thinking now. I'm just thinking if there was a way, I know one of the things we brought to the table, it'd have to be a win-win. It would have to be a win for Solvang. It would be you guys would have to sign off, say, hey, this works for us, this works for us. It'd have to be a win for ID1. And I think we could structure something like that. That was my recollection of the last meeting, and that's as far as it got. So I guess we find ourselves here tonight. We're very interested in taking the next step, whatever that is, if the city is.
Well, I can say these other efforts to cooperate or merge or something always fell to the wayside because the situation or the negotiations came to a standstill. Right. And I think that the Solvang side felt that we were not getting a win out of it. Okay. And I think that's probably why we broke any negotiations out or took the exit ramps off of some of the MOUs we had.
Sure.
And that's a fear in my mind, is that we're going to be taken advantage of possibly in discussion with a merger. Sure. And I want to make sure that it's a win-win and that we're happy with it.
And can we as a council just determine that this is what we're going to do, or does it have to go to a vote of the people?
You could, depending on what the end result is, that there's likely not required there to be a vote of the people. There's no law that requires Solvang to be a water purveyor in the city limits of Solvang. I've been city attorney in 2 other cities, neither of which did water. Tascadero has a mutual water company, which is a nonprofit jointly owned water company of everybody who's in the limits of the water company, which is slightly bigger than the Atascadero city limits. King City had a private water company, a private for-profit, regulated by the PUC. So it's certainly not required, and the council could make that decision. Now, there are some parameters you'd have to pay attention to in the process. For instance, the decision as to whether or not I'm just going to talk out of my ear because I'm not part of any of the discussions. We'll pick as the example that Solvang no longer does water, and the improvement district doesn't have to change its boundaries because it already has the right to serve here. It handles all the water for everybody, including everybody in Solvang. You would have meet and confer issues with your employee units. Now, they don't get to tell you, they don't have to agree to the policy decision, but you would have to meet and confer with employees on the effects of that policy decision. So there's process to follow. Likely there would be some process to be concerned with LAFCO. Although you're not changing any boundaries, I'm sure that there would be a process there. Because we're not changing boundaries, I don't think that there's an election required, but there would be some process to follow. That being said, there's going to be some legal things to look at. The legal won't be driving the policy. The policy would just tell me how to help your staff deal with the legal issues, so the processes on all the different levels are followed correctly.
There may be rate considerations in a 218 process because of rate changes.
Eventually, there would be, but that magic of the rates following through, that's been fairly well settled. So you can't impose an increase, but you aren't required to decrease rates if we stop serving and the district just served.
So until such time as rate increase over a combined unit would happen,
Well, not only
or
that,
rate change.
you would time it. Are you guys on the normal fiscal year for public agencies? Not everybody is.
I believe so.
Okay.
I think they're 1 year behind us on rate studies.
I don't, but you would time it. You could solve it with a joint study. You would time it on your fiscal years, just because that only makes sense. If there's going to be a different employee structure, it's just better for each entity to make those changes on a July 1 as opposed to any other time during the year. But those are all important details for everybody's policy decisions. But from a legal perspective, that part's easy to deal with. The complication is arriving at the win-win, and that's pure policy.
Absolutely. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, that's kind of where we are. We're just trying to see if we should even go in that direction of finding the win-win. That's what we're looking for, really.
The question I'll have then is, do we want to make a serious stab at a merger and discussions?
It's up to you guys.
I'm sorry?
I'm just sitting here as the messenger.
Well, yeah,
We haven't shot you
but
yet,
you
so you're
you
still
get you
Huh? We haven't killed the messengers yet, so you're.
you get a chance to confirm whether we should go ahead with serious discussion or not with the merger. I don't know if we.
I think it would be worth stabbing into it.
And that's I see that as some form of financial costs, because there may be studies in negotiation. You know, we don't know what their structure is or what our structure is and what the combined structure will be. We have to negotiate those kinds of things, and and there's, God bless them, there's lawyers involved, and so it's not a decision that should be made lightly, is what I'm trying to say.
I think on the other side of that, though, I see a financial gain. We have all these capital improvements that we have planned, and maybe it costs us a couple $100,000, call it $500,000 in fees. That's way out of control. It would never cost that. But I'm saying 500 grand versus what, 5-10 million that we could potentially save if we just merge our resources together.
You're forgetting, first of all, how incredibly cheap I am. And second of all, you're forgetting how well your city is managed, which is one of the reasons
Right.
I'm incredibly cheap.
Yes.
And so, yeah, your staff will have to spend some time on it, but you can give an honest stab at it to pick those words, I think, without much real expense, because of most of the expertise you're going to need to answer the questions that can be answered during that time. Your staff isn't going to have to go anywhere, and we're not going to need to hire outside. We already have Chris Campbell on retainer for water law issues. We already have Colin Tuno, Highsmith, and Watley on retainer for other duties as assigned. There might be some issue or two that comes up while we do this, that either I or Mr. Fleischman want to make sure we have the A+ answer instead of the A- answer. And I'll give you, for instance, when we were analyzing, and I happened to do that, what our obligations are under the water supply agreement vis-a-vis what can we pay out of the general fund, as opposed to what do we have to pay out of the rates in order to comply with our rate covenant. I was really sure I had the right answer, but it was a real important issue, so we consulted with Colin Tuno, Highsmith, and Watley just to make sure. Well, we said, well, that only cost us, just a very few $100. And I can't promise you it would only be a few $100, but during this process, your costs from this end aren't going to get out of control.
But are we going to be expected to share their costs? Because we know that they're
I
expensive.
can't speak for the other side. I have consistently advised under these circumstances where you're looking for a win-win, that one public agency does not pay the costs of another public agency. You each bear your own costs. But that's a decision that's up to you. That's not a legal mandate.
I think we're so preliminary. If we're looking for a win-win and we have to lawyer up to get to it, we got a problem to begin with. This is a couple people sitting talking to another couple people. We really don't even bring staff with us. So when we get to a point, and who knows when and where that point is, that we can start seeing something serious happening one way or another, where we're going to have to bring someone in.
I wouldn't necessarily.
Then we would have to definitely come back and have a discussion about it here. But I don't see, Jeff, you guys going out and all of a sudden show up with Gary.
No,
On-
we
on
try
the
to avoid
clock.
that ourselves too.
Yeah.
So,
So I think it's gonna, we're gonna spend some time, maybe a few meetings or.
actually, I think we're pretty productive in those ad hoc meetings. And, a step forward, in my opinion, would be, let's talk to LAFCO. We know we have to do that. Doesn't cost much at all. So, these are little steps to just pave the way. And I agree with you, when it gets to that time where, quote, we have to bring staff or lawyers, that's another discussion. But I think there's plenty we can do in the interim. If we have 5 members of the city council that are saying, yeah, we're interested in this, that's all the board, that's all that ID1 wanted to hear, is that this isn't just some fleeting idea, that we really want to look at this. So I go back to my board, I report on this, and I think there's plenty of steps, little steps we can take that cost little or next to nothing, and then we just take it one step at a time. And Mayor Richardson, I agree with you. There's no way that I would want any sort of merger that you felt that, this is not advantageous to Solvang. I believe along the way we have to make it advantageous for both of us. Those old days are gone, really, in my mind. I'm looking for a new day here. So I say, we look at it.
Matt?
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
I can think of several advantages and only like really 2 disadvantages. One disadvantage is if you merge, like Council Member Jameson was saying, your number of service connections would be over 3,000, and so you'd be considered an urban water
that's right, yeah.
provider. And you'd have to every 5 years you have to produce an urban water management plan. But that's actually a very good planning tool, a very good drought preparation tool, a very good water conservation tool. So it's kind of a negative because you got to pay to update that plan every 5 years. But I can tell you from a regulatory standpoint, the state wants to see small agencies merge. The state already has brought in the Division of Drinking Water underneath the umbrella of the State Water Resources Control Board. Everything now on water and wastewater and recycled water is all now one agency, and honestly, I mean, you have to think, you gotta have some strategic long-range planning here, and down the road, 4 small agencies are just gonna get beat up. City of Buellton, the City of Solvang, ID1, and the San Ynez Community Services District. These agencies, we're gonna get beat up because we don't have the expertise we need. We don't have the resources. If you have everything with water, wastewater, and recycled water, you kind of have to think outside the box and like a whole new paradigm. That's the best way to keep the rates, water and sewer rates in the whole valley at their lowest, pulling all those resources together. You've got the biggest block of voting with CCWA altogether. You have the best resources altogether to protect water rights in the river with all the Kachuma issues and all that. So, it's just like they say, divided we're weak, united we're strong. And I've seen all the regulations changing over the years and stuff, and the state really is pushing, and they're not going to make it easy. And having everything with water, wastewater, and recycled water combined is, I think, as a Valley resident and employee of the city,
So what you're telling me?
eventually, 20 years from now, you're going to be wishing you looked at it carefully. If you don't, you would be kicking yourself.
So what you're telling us, based on your years of experience in the water business, that you think it's a good thing to go a step forward to merge it with the overall, it's on balance.
I do, but you'd want to include wastewater in that.
Wastewater also.
Because that incorporates recycled water, and the state's really pushing. I mean, if you want to do a recycled water project, they'll just practically throw money at you.
Then we have to consider
but-
CSD in that condition.
So that would be, and we now have the new Groundwater Sustainability Act we have to bring into the valley.
So you're pulling all those resources, and you'd be a very strong agency, and
Yeah, the more you get involved, but it's.
I might suggest at this level that we stay on just the baby step.
Right.
And I'm not speaking against all those other things, because I don't have the expertise to do that, even have an opinion. But first of all, we only have the one thing on the agenda, and second of all, it's a paradigm shift. And because I've been here for 18 years, when I first got here, there were certain entities' names and certain people's names I wasn't allowed to say.
Yes, that's right, yeah. That's
Okay,
right, that's right.
so this is a paradigm shift. And so I said baby step, but it's actually a big step. So I'd recommend we stay focused on that. And even if we only get to the point where success on this leads to intelligent discussion on all those other issues, that would be a huge accomplishment.
So, do we, in order to give the ad hoc committee approval to go forward with this idea, do we need just a direction, or do we need a motion?
You just need direction, because they don't have the authority to make any deal. What's going on here is the ad hoc committee doesn't want to get ahead of the city council as a whole,
Okay.
because it's not their decision to make. And we've heard from a member of the board of directors of the improvement district, and because they know it's a paradigm shift too. They kind of want to have some warm fuzzies that there's a reasonable chance that if both sides keep working towards a win-win, something might come of it.
Where we broke the last meeting was that we were gonna talk to our council and get reaction from our report on the merger. ID1 was gonna do the same thing. Their meeting was a few days after ours. So I think, what we're looking for, is that the Solvang City Council is interested in talking further about merger. And it's certainly gonna be baby steps. I mean, we're not gonna be cutting deals. We're gonna learn how to play in the sandbox without throwing sand in each other's face.
That's right.
That's where we're at.
That's right.
We haven't even made it to the playground yet.
Right,
We're still in the
buddy, that is
sandbox.
right. That is right.
I see two people in agreement. How about the rest of us? Do we think we need to go forward with the ad hoc committee discussing merger with ID1?
Yeah.
I'm in favor of it.
Well, I got at least 4, so.
Okay, so therefore.
I'm leery, but
You-
you got 4 out of 5.
Okay, you've got your marching orders then, is to.
Continue the
Let's
dialogue.
continue the dialogue, set up some form of a program or strategic planning on how to accomplish all of it in the baby steps, and then come back to us so that we can agree with it and go on forward. And you can have as many meetings as you'd like. And if you have them here, the coffee's free.
Please continue until after December, so I won't have to make the decision.
Hey, Jeff, thanks a million. We really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Okay, with that, are there any, let's see, that's the end of item 8. Back to the agenda.
Reports, committee reports,
Let's see,
and then
back to the beginning. Eddie's right. It's the committee reports. Are there any committee reports? I don't have any.
Eddie,
Okay.
do you want to say anything?
I'm sorry?
Eddie?
No.
You don't want to say anything about the library ad hoc committee meeting?
how you want? Oh,
We met. We can just say we met.
yes. Oh, yeah. I
We
didn't
met.
forget. Yes. We did have an ad hoc meeting with the Buellton committee, and the discussion was interesting. We had some positions that we felt were reasonable. The city of Buellton had some positions they felt were reasonable. And I don't think there was a real mutual feeling that each other's positions were reasonable to each other. But I think we are there. I think we may try to meet again and see if we can come up with something a little bit closer. But I think the individuals, an individual from the library system was unable to make our meeting, and I think we need to get some more input from the Santa Barbara Library on how they are planning to proceed, because what we ended up with the county library people were, okay, you guys figured out we don't want to have anything to do with it, after they're the ones who kind of put the fat in the fire in the first place. So it will be interesting to see what comes up with the county and what the Board of Supervisors does with their per capita. We probably should try to meet again and see what we can see if people have come up with some willing to change some of their positions. But right now, it wasn't the most productive meeting I've ever been to. Does that?
I'd like to mention that I had an offline discussion with one of those ad hoc committee members, and they're very adamant in their position. Really. Thank you. Is there any other council member reports? With that, we'll go into closed session. Would you please announce closed session? Mrs. Clerk.
Closed
Item 10
session
and
will
11, yeah.
consist of 2 items. Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. And Government Code Subdivision A of Section 54956.9, existing litigation, amendment to permit 15878 in front of the State Water Resources Control Board.
Thank you. We're adjourned to closed session.